You know, I wish they'd make handheld systems smaller. I mean, this is great and all for my giant man hands, but they only make pockets so big. Anyway, in the early 2000s, there was only one name in the handheld industry: Game Boy Advance. Sorry, the N-Gage was not selling. And since GBA games were cheap and easy to make and could easily hit a large audience of children who owned the device, of course LEGO made Bionicle games for it. And in the spirit of the Flash Games review, let's look at all of them. The very first game, way back in 2001, was... I'm not really sure what this game is called. I've heard it referred to as Tales of the Tohunga and Quest for the Toa, but the box just calls it LEGO Bionicle, so that's what I'm using. And I'll just say, the games had to start somewhere, I guess. This is a top-down adventure game, but it's at a weird angle for no discernible reason. You're Matoran, who's canonically supposed to be Takua, but you can make him anyone, can move awkwardly, jump over tiny obstacles, maybe pick things up if the control allows it, and drown in 3-inch water. Takua is a pacifist. He can throw food or use an item like Vakama's fire staff to stun enemies, but it doesn't last long. Isn't it great when you can't kill any enemy in a game when that's not the gimmick? Makes the boss fight especially hard, coupled with the fight requiring slowly pulling a boulder past a rock monster that takes up most of the caverns. The first dungeon isn't well designed, with all the boulders down narrow hallways without the room to expect a player to dodge them. Also, the pre-rendered graphics look lifeless and the music is entirely forgettable. Skip this one. Following the next year was Bionicle, Matoran Adventures. Not a sequel, a completely separate game, a decision I'm very thankful for. But let's not get ahead of ourselves on the quality, we need to take a real look. This one thankfully goes for a much simpler genre with a platformer, flip switches in the stages to activate the way to the next area, using 2 Matoran. Kongu can double jump and attack, so he's the primary one you're going to be using, while the guy you just pick up off the road can break walls and press switches. The graphics are vibrant, music ain't bad, and you can attack and kill enemies this time. I have no hesitation calling this an improvement. But, as I said in the last review, an improvement over crap doesn't mean anything by itself, because we're only barely scraping at the playable stage. The most glaring problem is the horrible screen crunch. Kongu takes up a significant portion of the display, which means absolutely no indication what's above, below, or next to you ever. I wouldn't say it's Mega Man and Bass bad, if only because the levels are less demanding, but games developed for the GBA should be better aware of the resolution available. Also, the jump is incredibly heavy, which makes the double jump absolutely necessary for every leap, and one of the most common enemies, the Bowrock, are annoying to kill and almost as hard to run past. I still can't recommend this, but if you have to play every game, you'll have a little bit of a better time. 2003 wasn't just for the handheld games. The first console game was released, and being a multi-platform game released in the 6th generation, there was a GBA version of Bionicle the game. Without a doubt, this is the most ambitious of all, but ambition doesn't mean much to me. This game is also isometric, but a platformer again, which makes it better or worse depending on who you talk to. Right off the bat, you get the choice between the 6 Toa Mata, but there's also the Toa Nuva and Takanuva later on, which makes it more full-featured than the console game. The music is actually good for the first time, and the character models are in 3D, I'm pretty sure they're full 3D models. For the GBA, that's not bad. A licensed isometric platformer attempting 3D for the GBA? That's gotta be a recipe for disaster. It's certainly what I thought playing the game for the first time, but trying it again for the review, I think it almost works. The frame rate is consistent, attacking enemies is made easier with L targeting, and there's nothing difficult to understand. If this was punching weight, I'd be impressed. But notice how I said almost works, because aiming higher only makes the fall more deadly. The camera angle doesn't always indicate where there's a bed of instant death spikes. Enemies respawn and take way too many hits to kill, and just as you expected, the perspective is confusing when it comes to platforming. This right here is the prime example. Where do you think Kopaka has to jump to reach the next platform? It looks like an up-left jump, right? It's actually pure left. Those directions probably sounded confusing, and that's because they are. Isometric movements on a D-pad are always a struggle. It's all about how you decide to tilt the movement axis, but this manages to do it completely wrong. Let's take the D-pad and tilt it this way. Left translates to northeast, when not only would a diagonal press be preferable, but if it has to be confusing, I'd rather up move in that direction. I couldn't figure out why this was so hard for me to grasp until I decided to test it against Sonic 3D Blast. While a game with a host of its own problems, at least the cardinal directions correspond accurately to the D-pad. I haven't even played that game much, it's just more natural, but I can't find it in me to hate this game and give it my stamp of disapproval. Like I said, it almost works. Maybe if you configured your emulator controls weird to accommodate and entered a GameShark code for infinite lives, it'd be suitable. But theorizing how to jury-rig a duct tape solution isn't a way to sell a game, so as it is, Bionicle the game for GBA is only presented to those gamers who love the strange and odd missteps. I'd be lying if I said that wasn't me. So for the last 3 games in a row, we've had a process of maybe they're improving. That flakiness can't last forever, so the year after that, let's just have a legitimate upgrade. Bionicle Maze of Shadows is chronologically the first commercial Bionicle game I can recommend. It's less ambitious than probably any of the games before it, but it benefits from taking its base from a proven success. Pokemon. Yeah, it's basically a Pokemon rip-off, though I can point to a few differences, some give and take. The first is lack of party customization. There's only 6 Toa after all, but it's made up for by having all 6 available from the start and an even balance of the elements. Each Toa shares the same move pool of attacks with 2 unique to each, their tool and mask, but the benefit is a larger move pool with free access to elemental attacks through the discs. Unfortunately, it's not perfect, but I don't think anyone was expecting a Bionicle game to be. There's no clear indication which element each enemy is, considering they're using pre-existing designs. Not that I can always tell from a glance which element a Pokemon is either, but there's color and name cues there. With this, the only way to tell is trial and error. Despite all Toa being available from the start, there's no free control over the elemental attacks at the beginning. You have to find the discs that will be the primary attacks, and their stats between elemental, level, and additional effect is set, and the Toa's unique moves aren't always attacks. I went through most of the first area, and I never found a water disc, and both of Nokama's moves are non-attacks. And finally, for the beginning of the game, the enemy dodge rate is annoyingly high, but a couple relatively minor complaints like that don't dampen the experience, and there's even a few things I like better than Pokemon. Battles are usually visible on the map, and you can attack them on the field to get a turn advantage in the fight, though dawdling in the same area triggers random encounters, which is good if you need to grind. Most of the game is out of battle actually. The caves have puzzles to be solved that require each Toa's unique abilities, and they're taught to the player quickly. Think of it like HM usage, but constant puzzling and not pace breaking. And the music is pretty kick-ass too. I think even non-Bionicle fans can enjoy this one so long as you like Pokemon. 2005 was the first year Bionicle missed the GBA. There's only one Flash game too. Were they really too busy making Web of Shadows a good movie? History repeated itself the next year with the final console Bionicle game, Bionicle Heroes. And like I said before, back in those days, any multi-platform game had to have a GBA version. It was truly a beautiful time, because this version of Bionicle Heroes is also pretty damn good, if you're into the repetitive action type. This is a top-down shooter, an odd choice considering I'm pretty sure that genre's been dead since the 90s. The Toa and Ica have already been defeated by the Paraka, and a Matoran named Balta falls into a pool of energized Protodermis and arises as a new Toa. He starts off as Tahu, but slowly not only levels up his element, but collects the masks of the other elements as well. He can shoot a semi-rapid-fire standard shot or a more powerful special shot that uses energy, but it recharges quickly, so use it frequently. destroy every enemy that appears and move on to the next screen. Without a doubt, this game is mindless and would probably get really boring over a stretch of time, but it's a blast in short bursts. You're equipped in artillery to deal with the situation, you move fast enough to be mobile and have a strafe button. Everything mechanically checks out, which probably makes it the most solid game of the bunch, once again because it plays it really safe. And once again, that safety net gives them one hell of a soundtrack. Even with the precaution of the nature of the genre, there's still other complaints, unfortunately. Some of them I can't blame the game for, given the limits of the hardware, like it not being dual analog and not having co-op, but the length of the level really should have been tested. I only recorded the first level, and that gave me half an hour of footage. That's really not acceptable for a handheld game. So if you've got at least half-hour periods where you want a dumb game like this, it's great. But the Game Boy Advance was no longer the only handheld by 2006. In fact, it was mostly dead. Sorry, mother fans. And if you think I'm talking about the PSP, oh, that's funny. Now, the DS was the big new name on the block, so of course there was a version of Bionicle Heroes made for the dual screen system. With that much extra power, there's gotta be something impressive. I've got one thing to say about this game. How did anyone play Metroid Prime Hunters back in the day? This uses the same control scheme and I found it absolutely unworkable. I admit that it's possible it's better on a DS instead of an emulator, but just imagining it gives me a sense of dread. And the almost buttons-only control scheme was no better. It got to the point I had to make the emulator see my analog sticks as buttons just so I could have dual analog. I honestly thought I'd never see the day that I'd pray for a dual analog FPS. Okay, but maybe I'm just in the minority on the control scheme. Metroid Prime Hunters was a popular game, though I'm just as inclined to believe the game has aged horribly in only 10 years. So how does this game hold up if you can handle that? Well, I admit that my opinion is biased now, but I don't feel it's very engaging either. It's similar to the console game in structure, so consider this a sneak peek to that. You need to shoot down enemies and collect Lego pieces to fill up the hero mode meter, and this game is easy. Dying only sends you back to the beginning of the room and depletes your meter. The enemies you killed remain dead. The DS version of Bionicle Heroes, unfortunately, loses its appeal right after picking up the box. There's a Lego game that's not only an FPS, but it's rated T. That I find hilarious. But the game itself is boring. It relies more on enemy waves than the console version, and it doesn't give you access to all the Toa powers right away either. The soundtrack is also pretty forgettable. I swear it has worse instruments than the GBA. The graphics are okay for this system at least, and I suppose there's an audience that enjoys these controls, but making a review means telling you what I thought of the game, and I thought this one was unplayable. It's at least more competent than the early GBA games, but that doesn't mean anything when I can't or won't play it. Whether or not Maze of Shadows or GBA Heroes is better is subjective. They both have good points and are overall fun games, but that's still only a 33% average of good. Maybe if they played it safer and made more common games, there would have been a decent library of Bionicle games on handhelds. Probably much better than more expensive to produce console games. But sadly, the ideal is usually just fantasy. So then, what's the ideal for console Bionicle Heroes? Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. I'm also a part of a Let's Play channel you can check out if we ever upload, or you can look at my Twitter account where I've posted some strange things. I'm probably working on the next video now, so stay tuned.